Mall manager kicks out a disabled man for wearing MAGA hat, unaware he is the undercover owner. The shopping mall was bustling on a crisp Saturday afternoon, filled with a sea of diverse faces. Families wandered from store to store, couples shared soft pretzels, and kids tugged impatiently at their parents' arms, begging to visit the toy shop. Amid the hum of commerce and chatter, a man in his early 50s wheeled himself quietly into the food court. He wasn't flashy or demanding attention, just a simple, everyday visitor in plain jacket, jeans, and a bright red MAGA hat perched atop his head. This man was Jacob Hartman, a successful entrepreneur and the true owner of the sprawling mall. Jacob had built his empire from scratch, overcoming personal and professional hurdles that most wouldn't survive. Today, though, he wasn't here as the polished CEO who spoke at conferences or cut ribbons at grand openings. Today, Jacob wanted to observe his mall and its staff as any regular customer would. "Excuse me, sir," an employee at the fast food counter said with a polite smile. "What can I get you?" Jacob ordered a burger and fries, handed over a crisp $20 bill, and rolled to a corner table by the large glass windows overlooking the parking lot. He liked the quiet space, away from the bustling crowd. As he ate, he noticed a group of teenagers pointing at him, whispering and laughing. He was used to this. The MAGA hat tended to draw attention, both good and bad. He didn't mind. It was a symbol of his beliefs, not a weapon to provoke anyone. He smiled faintly to himself and returned to his meal. Not far away, the mall manager, Melissa Grant, was prowling the food court like a lioness on the hunt. Melissa was in her mid-40s, dressed sharply in a tailored blazer, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. Her demeanor screamed authority, and her sharp eyes scanned the area for anything, or anyone, that didn't fit her idea of acceptable clientele. "Do you see that man?" she muttered to a junior employee standing nervously beside her. "The one in the wheelchair, by the windows." The employee nodded hesitantly. "Yes, ma'am." Melissa's lips thinned. "That hat. I've told everyone that kind of political nonsense is not welcome here. We have a reputation to uphold." "But he's not causing any trouble," the junior employee ventured timidly. Melissa shot her a glare that could freeze fire. "It's not about trouble, it's about image. We don't need the complaints. I'll handle it." She squared her shoulders, adjusted her blazer, and strode purposefully toward Jacob's table. Her heels clicked loudly on the tile floor, each step brimming with self-righteous authority. "Excuse me," Melissa said, her voice icy but polite enough to veil her disdain. Jacob looked up from his burger, his hazel eyes calm but curious. "Yes?" he asked, his tone neutral. "I'm Melissa Grant, the manager of this mall. I'm going to have to ask you to remove your hat or leave the premises," she stated firmly, folding her arms. The statement drew the attention of nearby diners, and conversations hushed as eyes darted toward the unfolding drama. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "May I ask why?" Melissa's posture stiffened. "We've received complaints about your hat. It's a political statement that some of our customers find offensive. This is a family-friendly establishment, and we cannot allow anything that disrupts the comfort of our patrons." Jacob chuckled softly, setting down his burger. "I see. And is there a policy that says wearing a hat is grounds for removal?" Her lips twitched into a tight smile. "As the manager, I have the discretion to maintain a peaceful and welcoming environment." Jacob leaned back in his wheelchair, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I understand your concern, but I'm just here to enjoy my meal. I'm not disturbing anyone. If someone is uncomfortable because of a hat, that's their issue, not mine." Melissa's patience was wearing thin. "Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. You can either comply or leave. Security will be here shortly to escort you out if necessary." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some diners whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with Melissa's approach. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, recording the encounter, while a middle-aged man murmured, "Why can't he wear a hat? This is America, isn't it?" Jacob glanced at the onlookers, then back at Melissa. "You're making a spectacle out of nothing," he said evenly. "Do you really think this is the right way to handle the situation?" Melissa's cheeks flushed. "Sir, this is your final warning." Before Jacob could respond, 2 burly security guards arrived, summoned by Melissa's earlier call. They stood on either side of Jacob's table, their expressions unreadable. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of them said, his tone firm but not aggressive. Jacob sighed and took a final bite of his burger. "Fine," he said, rolling his wheelchair back slightly. "But you might want to think about how this looks to everyone watching." As the guards escorted him toward the exit, the teenager with the phone followed discreetly, still recording. Melissa exhaled sharply, brushing imaginary dust off her blazer. "Some people just don't get it," she muttered to herself, turning to head back to her office. Unbeknownst to Melissa, the teenager uploaded the video to social media within minutes. The title read, Disabled man kicked out of mall for wearing a NAGA hat. It began racking up views and comments at lightning speed. Jacob left the mall quietly, but there was a faint smile on his face. Melissa had no idea that her moment of authority was about to set off a chain of events she couldn't control. Because the man she had just humiliated wasn't just any patron. He was the very person who signed her paychecks, and tomorrow her world was about to turn upside down. Melissa Grant returned to her office with a sense of accomplishment. The situation in the food court had been handled, and as far as she was concerned, she'd done her duty to protect the mall's family-friendly environment. She sat at her desk, shuffling papers and mentally moving on. Yet the uneasy glances she received from some of her staff earlier lingered in her mind. Still, Melissa brushed it off as part of the job. Leadership wasn't about being light. It was about making tough decisions. Meanwhile, across town, Jacob Hartman was settling into his home office, sipping a cup of tea as his phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications from social media apps, emails from concerned friends, and even a text from his PR manager began pouring in. "Jacob, this is blowing up." The text read, "You need to see the video." Jacob clicked on the link provided and leaned back as he watched the grainy footage of his encounter with Melissa. The teenager had recorded everything. The calm way he'd responded, Melissa's escalating hostility, and the security guards escorting him out. The caption read, "This is what happens when prejudice meets ignorance. Disabled man kicked out of a mall for wearing a NAGA hat." The comments were a firestorm. "Unbelievable. People need to learn respect. This guy is my hero for staying so calm. Who's the manager? She should be fired. Jacob Hartman? Isn't he the CEO of Hartman Enterprises? Gee." Jacob smirked. Clearly, some viewers had recognized him. This wasn't just a social media moment. It was a full-blown PR crisis for his mall. But instead of anger, Jacob felt something else. Curiosity. How would Melissa handle herself if she knew who he really was? By the next morning, the video had reached over 1 million views, and local news stations began picking up the story. Melissa, however, was blissfully unaware. She started her day as usual, walking through the mall to ensure everything was in order. She greeted a few employees curtly, issued instructions to tighten up displays, and made a mental note to follow up on the new seasonal decorations. It wasn't until mid-morning, when she noticed an unusual number of people loitering near the food court with their phones out, that she started to suspect something was off. A young employee approached her, nervously holding a tablet. Ms. Grant, have you, seen this?" he asked, hesitating as he held the screen toward her. Melissa frowned and snatched the tablet. Her heart sank as she saw the now viral video. Her face was unmistakable. The footage captured her confrontation with Jacob in excruciating detail. The comments scrawled across the screen ranged from critical to outright furious. "Where did this come from?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Social media. It's everywhere now," the employee replied, stepping back as if bracing for a storm. "A lot of people are upset." Melissa's mind raced. This could ruin her. She needed to act quickly to contain the fallout. "Get PR on the phone," she barked. "We need a statement, now." As Melissa scrambled to salvage her reputation, Jacob was already en route to the mall. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, he no longer looked like the quiet man in a wheelchair she had dismissed the day before. Today he carried an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. When he arrived at the mall, employees and customers alike did double takes. Word of his identity had spread like wildfire. Staff whispered among themselves, unsure of what was about to happen. Jacob moved through the mall with purpose, heading straight for Melissa's office. He knocked twice before pushing the door open. Melissa looked up from her desk, her face pale as she registered who stood before her. "You," she stammered, struggling to find words. "What are you doing here?" Jacob rolled forward and stopped in the center of the room, his gaze steady. "Good morning, Ms. Grant. I believe we need to talk." Melissa swallowed hard. "I can explain. Yesterday was a misunderstanding." Jacob held up a hand, silencing her. "No need to explain just yet. I've seen the video. I've read the comments. But what I really want to know is this. Do you believe the way you handled that situation was appropriate?" Melissa's throat tightened. I was trying to maintain order. We've had complaints about." "Complaints?" Jacob interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "Or personal bias? Let's not sugarcoat this, Ms. Grant. You saw a man in an NAGA hat and decided he didn't belong in your mall." Melissa's defenses began to crumble. "I was thinking of the mall's reputation." "Stop," Jacob said sharply. "Do you know who I am?" Melissa's eyes darted nervously. I've heard rumors." "I'm Jacob Hartman," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of authority. "I own this mall. I own all the malls under Hartman Enterprises. And yesterday, you kicked me out of my own property." The silence in the room was deafening. Melissa's face turned a deep shade of crimson. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jacob leaned forward slightly, his voice softening but losing none of its power. Do you have any idea what kind of message that sends? Not just to me, but to every customer who walks through those doors? To every employee who works under you? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Hartman, Jacob held up his hand again. Save it. This isn't about me being your boss. It's about the values we stand for as an organization. And you've failed to uphold them. Melissa looked down at her desk, trembling. Are you firing me? Jacob considered her for a long moment. That depends on you. I believe in second chances, but only if they're earned. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to issue a public apology, sincere, not rehearsed. You're going to enroll in a mandatory leadership and diversity training program, and you're going to work with your team to rebuild the trust you've broken. He paused, letting his words sink in. If I see even a hint of this kind of behavior again, you'll be out the door faster than you can say reputation. Do I make myself clear? Melissa nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Mr. Hartman, I understand. Jacob nodded and stood. Good, let's hope you mean it. Because if you don't, the next time we have this conversation, there won't be a second chance. As he left her office, employees and customers watched with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. The tables had turned, and Melissa Grant had learned a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The mall felt like a different place after Jacob left Melissa's office. Employees whispered in hushed tones, customers hovered near the food court to discuss the unfolding drama, and Melissa sat in her office, staring blankly at her screen. The social media video had reached mainstream news outlets now, with headlines like, Mall manager faces backlash after kicking out disabled man in NAGA hat. Owner of local mall revealed as the man humiliated by his own manager. When prejudice meets power, Jacob Hartman speaks out. Melissa clicked through the articles, each one more damning than the last. She felt the weight of her poor decisions crushing her. Her phone buzzed nonstop, calls from colleagues, messages from her staff, and emails from the mall's corporate PR team, all demanding answers. In a desperate bid to salvage her reputation, Melissa decided to issue a statement. She sat at her desk, carefully crafting an apology, though her hands trembled as she typed. Later that afternoon, Melissa stepped into the mall's central atrium, where a small stage had been set up. The PR team had advised her to address the issue head-on, and a podium with microphones awaited her. The mall was quieter than usual, as word had spread that she would be speaking publicly. A few reporters lingered, cameras ready, while customers watched from the sidelines. Melissa approached the podium, her face pale but composed. She cleared her throat and leaned into the microphone. Good afternoon, she began, her voice shaky but steadying as she spoke. I want to address the events of yesterday and the concerns raised by our community. First and foremost, I deeply regret the way I handled the situation involving Mr. Hartman. My actions were unprofessional and do not reflect the values of this mall or its parent company. I take full responsibility. She paused, hoping to gauge the crowd's reaction. Some nodded, but others crossed their arms, skeptical. A man near the back muttered loudly, "Sounds rehearsed to me." Melissa pressed on. Moving forward, I will be taking part in mandatory training on leadership and inclusion to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. I also want to personally apologize to Mr. Hartman for my actions. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to finish. Thank you for your understanding as I work to make amends. Melissa stepped back from the podium, but the crowd remained quiet, their expressions unreadable. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Grant, how do you plan to rebuild trust with the community after this incident? Melissa hesitated. I will focus on fostering an environment of inclusion and respect. Another reporter jumped in. Do you think it's fair that you still have your job after what happened? Many online feel you should have been fired. The question hung in the air like a weight. Melissa stammered, I'm committed to proving I deserve this second chance. But the damage was done. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and the skepticism in their faces deepened. Melissa realized, too late, that her apology wasn't enough. The community's trust wasn't something she could regain with a few carefully chosen words. Meanwhile, Jacob had been following the events closely from his office. His inbox was flooded with messages, some praising his calm handling of the situation, others urging him to fire Melissa immediately. But Jacob wasn't impulsive. He knew that Melissa's actions had caused significant harm, but he also believed in the power of redemption when paired with accountability. That evening, he returned to the mall unannounced. Dressed casually, without the MAGA hat this time, Jacob blended in with the evening shoppers. He wanted to see how Melissa was handling herself now that the spotlight was fully on her. He found her near the atrium, speaking quietly with a group of employees. Her posture was slouched, her face weary, and her tone lacked the sharpness she'd wielded so confidently the day before. It was clear that the public reckoning had humbled her, but Jacob wasn't entirely convinced it was enough. Jacob stepped forward, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The employees fell silent, and Melissa turned to face him, her expression a mix of dread and relief. "Mr. Hartman," she began, her voice faltering. Jacob held up a hand, stopping her. "I'm not here for another apology," he said calmly. "I've heard enough words. Now I want to see action." He turned to the gathered employees and customers, addressing them as a group. "What happened here is more than just a managerial mistake. It's a reflection of deeper issues that don't just exist in this mall, but in our society as a whole. We all have a responsibility to treat each other with respect and dignity, no matter our differences." The crowd listened intently, some nodding in agreement. "To my employees," Jacob continued, "I want you to know that your voices matter. If you ever feel like someone in leadership isn't upholding our values, you can come directly to me. This mall belongs to all of us, and it should reflect the best of us." He then turned to Melissa. "You've been given a second chance, Melissa. Don't waste it. Prove to your team, your customers, and yourself that you can be better." Melissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I will, Mr. Hartman. I promise." Jacob glanced at the crowd one last time, offering a faint smile. "Let's move forward, together." As Jacob left the mall that evening, he felt a sense of closure. The situation wasn't perfect. There were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild. But it was a start. The viral video continued to circulate, sparking debates about prejudice, power, and the importance of accountability. Melissa, for her part, began making immediate changes. She held meetings with employees, listened to their concerns, and committed to the training Jacob had mandated. Though the road ahead was challenging, she was determined to prove she deserved her second chance. And as for Jacob, he remained a quiet yet vigilant presence in the background, ensuring that his malls not only thrived as businesses, but also stood as examples of fairness and respect. As Jacob wandered toward the food court, he noticed Melissa herself, sitting at a table with an elderly couple. She was attentively listening to them, her notepad open and pen poised. Nearby employees glanced over occasionally, some smiling faintly. Whatever Melissa was doing, it was clear she was making an effort. After the couple left, Jacob approached her table. She looked up, startled, then quickly stood. "Mr. Hartman," she said, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Jacob gestured for her to sit. "Relax, Melissa. I'm just here to talk." She hesitated but complied, folding her hands in front of her. "What can I do for you, sir?" Jacob studied her for a moment before speaking. "I've been observing the changes you've made here. The bulletin board, the outreach efforts, the way you've been engaging with staff and customers. It's a good start." "Thank you," Melissa replied, relief flickering across her face. "But it's just that, a start," Jacob continued. "Real change isn't about a few gestures. It's about consistency. Day in and day out, you have to prove to everyone here that you've learned from your mistakes." "I understand," Melissa said earnestly, "and I'm committed to doing that." Jacob nodded. "Good, because your team is watching you, your customers are watching you, and I'm watching you." Melissa swallowed hard but nodded. "I won't let you down." As weeks turned into months, the changes at the mall became more evident. Staff reported feeling more supported, customers noted the welcoming atmosphere, and the community began to see the mall as more than just a place to shop. Melissa's continued efforts to foster inclusion and fairness gradually repaired her reputation, though she knew it would always carry the scar of her past mistakes. Jacob remained a guiding force, though he intentionally stepped out of the spotlight. He trusted Melissa to lead, but he also made it clear that his watchful eye would ensure the mall stayed true to its mission. One afternoon, Melissa spotted a man in a wheelchair near the atrium. For a split second, her heart leaped in panic, memories of that fateful day flooding back. But this time, the man wasn't Jacob, it was a local veteran, proudly wearing a cap that read U.S. Army. Melissa hesitated, then approached him with a warm smile. "Hello, sir," she said. "Welcome to Hartman Mall. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to let us know." The man looked up, surprised by her sincerity. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, tipping his cap. As Melissa walked away, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. She wasn't just managing a mall anymore, she was building a community. Later that evening, Jacob received an email from one of the mall's employees. It was a simple message. "Mr. Hartman, just wanted to let you know that things feel different around here now, in a good way. Thank you for giving us a second chance to get it right." Jacob leaned back in his chair, his heart light. He had always believed in the power of redemption, and now he had proof that even the hardest lessons could lead to lasting change.